What you're about to listen to is a discussion I had with Christian symbologist Jonathan Pageau. Many of the strange, abnormal events and characters emerging today out of internet culture and our highly technified society, that is what I took interest from with Pageau's work. And this is what we talked about, how the chimeras of ancient Greece are re-emerging, how we've stolen the light of Prometheus and taken a bite of the forbidden fruit of knowledge through information technology, and how we're facing the threat of giants with artificial intelligence. We discussed these topics and much more in about an hour and a half long discussion. At some point later on, there's a bit of an audio hiccup where you can hear Pageau's voice echoing through my mic. This is an error on my part, but most of the discussion has pretty good audio, and much of it also has visuals that were edited in part by me, but also by my friend named Ahura Mazda, also known as TriHard Entertainment on YouTube. Thanks to him for some of these beautifully edited visuals. This conversation marks a new chapter in this channel where I would like to have more philosophical or symbolic conversations with people that are interested in belief, religion, magic, orthodoxy, and all kinds of strange and interesting interpretive views of reality that I believe we're shifting more towards culturally anyways. So without further ado, here is Jonathan Pageau. All right. Wow. Kind of surreal, but I'm here with Jonathan Pageau, who's a symbologist, a Christian symbologist, who you talk a lot about kind of modern symbols, things like the fall, like chimeras, like this world of symbols that's you could see through memes, you can see through culture, and through the imagery that's everywhere now with the internet. And well, these images, these actually mean something. Certain images, certain symbols actually have significance throughout time, throughout history, and that's kind of the world of symbols. Now, a little bit on me. I'm since we never met before, but so I'm a sort of filmmaker, or like I just upload documentaries to YouTube. I would say like a video artist or something, without being too pretentious about it. But I just kind of make videos that have to do with different cultural trends, or analyzing something that I think can be viewed through a historical lens, maybe. And symbolism, a frame that you're filming or something that you're showing on the screen is all symbolism, of course. So that's kind of how I perceive the world, and maybe why I gravitate towards the kind of stuff you do, is because I see the world through symbols. And just a quick backstory is that my ancestors are Armenian. Both my parents are Armenian. That was my first language. And Armenia is a very ancient culture. It's actually the first Christian country, and it's a very old ancient history with a lot of symbols. Their symbol actually, it's sort of this floral spiral that a little different than like a standard spiral with a circle, as in each line. I wish I could just show you, but each line is like a petal that is slightly more outward than the other, and it's sort of like the infinite spiral of life. But anyways, so it's kind of like a big part of my ancestry as well to have this kind of thing be a centerpiece for meaning and mythology, religion. I wanted to start off this discussion maybe with something that to me is sort of an interesting kind of symbolic motif, which is the fall, which is something you talk about a lot, and the modern day fall, because I think there has been a fall at different periods of history, maybe the fall of Rome, the fall of man as foretold in the Bible. But the first thing I want to maybe establish here is I've come to realize that and maybe if there's a disagreement here, I would love to hear your take, but I've come to realize that the Bible is not so much a story for a specific group of people at a specific time, but it's rather like a template, an archetypal story, of course, that is meant to apply throughout time periods, throughout civilizations. Is that a good starting point? Do you think that's right?
No, I think that's right. I think that in some ways you could say that stories can play that to a certain extent, because for the story to exist, it has to follow a certain template. It has to follow a template which just a template of your attention. is for you to care about something, it has to have a certain structure, because there's a million things happening all the time that you don't care about. And so in order to string any two events and think that they have something in common enough for you to join them together, means that there's a pattern to that. And so some of the old stories, like the ancient myths, they do that. They condense stories into very short stories that contain a lot of the structure or the matrix of reality. And so the Bible, I think, is the most complete version of that, especially moving from the fall up to the story of Christ and then into the eschaton, like this idea of this final image. So it's like this grand story that it tells you, that really shows you the pattern of all things. So yeah, that's the way that I see it. But it is also at the same time, because that is also part of the pattern, which is that these patterns, they don't exist abstractly. They exist embodied in peoples, embodied in histories, embodied in your story. And so it has to also be, so it's both the story of the people of, first the story of the fall of man told through the people of Israel, and then moving into the story of Christ, and then opening up to a kind of universal story, which is still contained in a particular. So it's both at the same time. It always has to be particularized for it to have an actual existence, right? It's not a mathematical formula. It's like an embodied pattern.
Before we get into kind of some of these major themes throughout the Bible and how they're significant today, I'm kind of curious as to what your take sort of is on, there seems to be a split in maybe Christianity, and on one side is sort of this more orthodox style that I see online and I see now as becoming more adopted, which to me is, and I could be wrong, but it seems to be less about like a literal defined interpretation based on a specific translation, and more about like this kind of congruence of mythologies, of archetypal stories, and maybe all the different translations, or even some of the books of the Bible that were left out. I don't know if you have a stance on that, or if you're like strictly following a certain.
No, not at all. I think your perception is right, in the sense that one of the things that happened in modern Christianity is there was a kind of polarity that got installed, which is, on the one hand, because of scientific materialism that became the predominant way of thinking, what you found Christians who started to try to defend the Bible on those terms. And so they're trying to like explain how this really happened, and looking for statues and places in the desert and archaeology and all this kind of historical criticism to prove that everything there happened, and let's say focusing on that. And then you have the other side, which is people that say it's all metaphor, it's all allegory, and then kind of using it to interpret all in any such way. And I think what people are discovering now, which seems to be a way out of this morass, is something like ancient traditional Christianity, which both says, yes, these are descriptions of events. They're describing events. They're not describing them in a way that have to justify scientific material categories. They're telling those events in a different way, a way that is more related to their meaning, to their, to the fact that they are kind of patterns for reality. And so I think it's, in some ways, it's a way out. So sometimes, when you get stuck with people that can't see through this, you will either get, let's say, really excited that I say these stories have very powerful mystical meanings. They're like, yeah, it's just myth, right? It's just allegories. I'm like, no, wait a minute, no. This is the description. It has to be anchored somehow in the world. So it's. I can say that both. I can talk about what the story says in the text itself, and then I can show how it's also this very powerful vision of reality and how it applies to your life every day. It applies to everything you deal with. So I do agree. And there is an interesting moment in terms of orthodoxy, which is definitely is a wave. Like there's a wave of people converting to orthodoxy right now. Young men, a lot of the parishes in the United States are doubling because of these guys in their 20s and 30s that are seeing in orthodoxy a way to be Christian that has all that kind of powerful mythological aspect, but doesn't also fly into anything goes and any interpretation goes, and you can just say whatever you want about the text. Like it has both of those together.
And so I think the first thing about the fall that is interesting for modern day is that I feel like we are sort of at a crossroads right now. You know, we're sort of at this end point of history, at least as we know it, because, well, you know, the fall starts with eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And, well, you know, so taking from the tree of knowledge. And I think in many ways that's happened in just in the sense that we have access to this age of information, to these technologies that are giving us all this knowledge, this information. But in doing so, they're kind of also complicating our life, our reality, maybe making things less in tune with nature or with God or whatever you want to call it. And the idea is that we're falling further away from something, but through another lens, maybe through this, like, I would say, like, mainstream science lens, we're at the same time progressing towards something else, you know, the machine, the AI, the what have you. And yeah, I mean, I guess why, maybe the first question is there a reason why we should, is the fall a necessary step towards something greater, or is it something that we should be looking to avoid, or is it unavoidable? Or, yeah, I mean, how do you view that?
Well, Christ has a wonderful statement, which is, you know, scandal must happen, but woe to those by whom it happens, which is that there's a sense in which the fall is participating in a greater story and is going to bring us ultimately out of the, right? It's like a U-shaped story. We go down into death and we come out on the other side. So that is definitely happening. But it doesn't mean that the elements of the fall are good, right? It doesn't mean that where the fall brings us is good in itself. It's good if it's seen from very far away and you can see how it's actually going to lead us back out into something more. So I think a lot of people can get confused in that sense, where if I say something like, say the story of the Bible, everything is leading towards the heavenly Jerusalem. Everything is leading towards a place where technology, where the city, where the human action is brought together and becomes the right place for us to exist. But there's also another image in Scripture, which is that there's a direct relationship between technification and increasing of the fall, because we add, it's like a kind of accumulation of layers, you could see it that way, where when Adam and Eve fall in the garden, God gives them these garments of skin to protect them from a world that's dangerous. He adds a layer around them. Then that layer becomes, further in the story, becomes something like Cain's fall, where Cain kills his brother, he falls further down, you could say, and then he creates a city. Then he creates weapons, and he creates technology. And so there's a sense in which the technification, because what it is, it's like on the one hand, it's like trying to protect ourselves more and more from the dangers and the uncertainties of a world of death. And so it's not bad in itself, but it's very dangerous because it can lead us to think that is what is valuable. It's not what's valuable. So you can see it in this idea of moving towards AI as if AI is a good in itself is crazy. It's like, no, it's not a good in itself, you know, and the fact that people think that it's a good in itself is already showing you that it seems to be an acceleration of the fall. Like it seems to be participating in that acceleration, as if technical solutions will come to help us in our moral and existential problems. Like that never happens. It's like that antidepressant pill, it's like a crutch, right? It's fine. But if you think that your entire society can rely on pharmaceuticals in order to hold your society together, you're going to end up with a really bad surprise at some point.
I've lately been kind of thinking, I just have different thought experiments about what different symbols throughout the Bible or certain orthodoxies can mean today. And I think AI can sometimes be viewed as the Antichrist or the Antichrist figure, as in something that promises this perfect world and actually seems capable of doing it for some period of time, but ultimately lacks maybe the soul or the light of God, or what makes the world or people complete, which is not all through mechanical informational means. Have you?
You're totally right. Your intuition is exactly right, because you can see it's not. People think that this is the first time this has happened. It's like, this is not the first time this has happened. Maybe it's the first time that something like this has happened at the scale at which we're dealing with it. But this is something which is described in ancient stories. This moment. It's described also. An example is, people know a little bit about the Book of Enoch. In the Book of Enoch, it describes the world before the flood, like before the end of a world. And one of the things it describes is that these principalities, these higher agencies, you could say, they mingle with humans and they create giant bodies, giants in the world. So we can understand it, of course, mythologically, as just giants. Like, you can see, all the imagery is fine in terms of these giant bodies that are eating people and that are, horrible and everything. But you can also understand giant bodies as something like corporations, as something like governments, as something like large beings with agency that act upon us and become carnivorous, right? Become cannibalistic, where they start to devour us. And the good, like you said, the good that they promise starts to veer out of control, and we can see the dark side of what that leads to, right? The story of the genie is a good example of this, where it's like the genie is in this lamp, it's in this technical container, and you give it your wish, and it gives you your wish, but it also gives you all the side effects of your wish. And this is something that happens with the increase of power in general. If you increase, so think about it like, you invented cars and we're going to create these things that are going to help us move around faster. This is great. We don't realize that there's a side effect to that, which is the absolute destruction of community. Now there are no communities. So now there are no town centers. Now there are no places where we congregate. Now our friends live an hour away from each other and everybody Zooms all over the place, but you don't know your own neighbor. And so that's a good example of like a side effect of a technical being, that we deal with the side effects later. Now, the problem with AI, not just AI, but also Google and all these technologies which deal with intelligence, is that if you bring that into the world of intelligence, in which you're going to create, you have no idea of the side effects of what is coming with AI. You can see there are some threads on Twitter that people can follow where people are starting to perceive, like everybody's fascinated by all these AI images are being produced, and it's like an epidemic of AI images. But there's some dark stuff down there. Even the way that they're setting up their AI is that they're basically letting the AI loose on the internet and on all of human learning. You don't realize how much dark stuff is there. What is it, like more than half of the internet is porn? And so it's like these AIs are out there feeding without any sense of predetermined ethics and morality, feeding on everything that we produce, all the dark stuff and the light stuff. But you think that's only going to produce light stuff? Like, you think it's only going to produce something that's going to help us?
Well, yeah, and then I think it's sort of like this train that's on track, and people, instead of, the question of morality or of meaning or of purpose is one that's more like a winding path through maybe like a jungle or a forest, something that you can't quite see fully. But I think the train, like with AI and with technology and where it's leading us, in other words, I think people are just happy to hop on board something that's going forward, something that's progressively, progressing through time, I guess.
That seems to be increasing is the best way to, that's all it seems to be. It's like something that's increasing. It's like we can notice that AI is increasing and technology is increasing. And so we think that that's progress. That's not progress. It's movement, but it's not necessarily movement towards progress in the real sense of being better, or becoming better people, or becoming better societies, becoming better civilizations. But the state, but like I said, this has happened before, and you can see it in stories like the Book of Enoch. You can see it in different stories that were told right at the outset of modernity, with stories like the Golem, for example, of Prague, or stories about Frankenstein, where the Golem of Prague is a great example, where it's like we create this big mechanical being that is an extension of our will, but is very powerful and is there to defend the city. at some point you lose control of that, and then it starts to kill, starts to destroy the inside.
In some ways, I feel like man or man's sense of self is almost the original version of that, as in your own ego can become the giant, the self-cannibalistic giant. And well, I sometimes wonder, like, well, is the ego, is God and the devil inside each person in the form of the self versus the maybe higher self, or the selfless part of your soul? Well, on a more like scientific level or philosophical level, I guess, one guy I listen to a lot is Terence McKenna, and he talks a lot about how science has kind of led us astray, because what people call science is actually just one sort of methodology of deductive reasoning. Whereas let's say you throw a rock in a pond 100 times to determine that some quality about the rock and its interaction with the pond. And you need to, you do this so that the 101st time it's going to have the same effect as the 100th time, right? But he talks about how he reasons actually that intuition and intuitive reasoning is a much more is a different way, where it's like the quality of something can tell you something, because everything, it's this view that everything is connected in some way, so that the quality of one thing can inform you about the quality of maybe all things, or of all similar things. And so it's like reasoning based on past experience or through patterns seen throughout nature. And in that way, he says that the universe is within your reach, that through direct experience, there's a primacy of direct experience, which is everything, which is all the cosmos.
The primacy of direct experience, that as people, the real universe is, within your reach, always. Everything not within your reach is basically unconfirmed rumor.
I thought that there was a parallel between that and this because I went to a private Christian school for much of my life, and one thing I always heard was the kingdom of heaven is in everyone, or something to that effect. Like,
what God desires is here and here, and what you decide to do every day, you will be a good man.
we all have access, the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and and then you talk about the head being the crown, being the sort of the place where you access heaven. I feel like this is all kind of one message of saying that whether it's through reason, through scientific means, through whatever means, there is a gateway between our ears that we can sort of tune into this higher being, and that the way to be is not through, well, the thing with technology is that it's this externalized material way of trying to get to a higher being, but perhaps the message to take from the fall, the message to take from a lot of these stories is that we have everything we need already, and that actually it's more like man versus self, or something even higher than that's going on here, rather than like man versus nature, or these physical barriers that we think we have to overcome.
Oh, I think your intuition is right. I think that what you said in terms of the idea that the cosmic conflict is happening inside you, this is something which is completely in line with what the church fathers would have said, or what most Christians who are thoughtful would realize. But it also plays itself out at all levels. So that's one of the reasons why we talk about how the Bible is a pattern, but that pattern is like think of it like as a fractal pattern, like as a self-same pattern, which applies at every level that you can recognize as having unity. Anything that you can recognize as having unity will participate in that pattern. So there are wonderful sayings in different traditions. For example, in some of the Taoist sayings you find in Buddhist sayings, where it's the idea that if you align yourself, the secret is to align yourself. Like if you align yourself, and things will flow out of there, like things around you will start to align. And so there's an analogy between you, like if you're a good citizen, that's the way to make the city a better place, right? And that it moves up. Like if you want a good family, you have to play the role in your family that you think that you are playing. Like if you want to have a good family, you have to be a good father. There's no other way to be a good family besides being a good father, besides being a good child, besides being a good wife, is so it's fractally true. It kind of stacks up that way. So the image of a cosmic struggle is true. It's a cosmic struggle. You're right that cosmic struggle has to find its solution in your own self first before you do anything else. Because if you don't have that alignment in you, then you'll spread your disorder. And you can see that in ideologically possessed people, which is that you see, like a lot of the political activists are completely out of whack. Like they're clearly mentally ill, or they're mentally unstable, and they try to find all their solution outside of them in changing the political world, sometimes through violence or through major activism, but usually they bring their disease into the political sphere. So I think that your intuition about that is right.
As we kind of advance further with technology, and this is sort of another McKenna quote, but again, it has parallels with the Bible. But so I forgot exactly where in the Bible it says this, but there's some phrase about how in the beginning word became flesh, and McKenna says that there in that statement is an implication that at some point the flesh becomes word again, and that. I kind of see this symbolized through, this technological age that we live in, and what you're talking about right there with these political extremists. I view all this political turmoil as a consequence of the breakdown of language as a result of the proliferation of information and the rate at which we receive this information. The language cannot keep up, and it's also becoming very disorienting and very confusing. And there's also parallels there with the Tower of Babel, where as man was building this, I mean, in that case, a literal tower trying to get up to heaven, but maybe in this case, more symbolically, as a technology that can make us comparable to gods, or conceivably make us comparable to gods. But in the pursuit of that, we actually end up losing ourselves in it, in this pursuit, and we become aliens to ourselves. I'm just kind of throwing different references out there.
You're totally right. Your intuition about it is right. Like it's the problem of supplementarity in general, especially the idea of increasing yourself this way and thinking that if you, like you said, like if you have the perfect structure, and then it'll be fine. And it's in the sense of technology as well, because this is the secret of supplementarity, the secret of anything you add to yourself. Technology is that it both makes you stronger and weaker at the same time. Every single technology. It's like my ancestor had to sweat like crazy to start a fire with a bow and a piece of wood or whatever, and it was really hard, and they had to spend 20-30 minutes trying to get their fire started. It's like, wow, I'm so lucky now. I've got a lighter. I can just go click, and I can start a fire. So I'm way more powerful. I'm 100 times more powerful than my ancestor. What if I don't have a lighter? And I don't know how to start a fire anymore.
With that, okay, that actually.
Think about that with memory now. Like ancients, if you look at the Greeks, they had these internal libraries. Would go into their internal library, and they would have a representation, either visual or just conceptual, a classification system, and they could pull out entire chapters of the Iliad and just recite the Iliad to you, right? They could learn the Psalter, and they could recite the Psalter to you without any damage. And it required extreme discipline and extreme effort, and it was very difficult. Now we have a phone. And the phone will give you everything, any information you want, anything you want, but you don't remember anything anymore.
We're
People
sort of
outsourcing. Don't even know their own phone number.
We're outsourcing the capabilities of the mind onto external material.
So it's like it is the supplementarity of in the mind. Like this is what information technology does, is that it exteriorizes the interior process, and it gives you the sense, but it actually does make you more powerful. So it's not false that it makes you more powerful, but it also makes you weaker, and it also makes you interiorly weak, which is why I think like the reasons I think for the mental breakdowns and like just the just mental health crisis that we're seeing has to do with that as well. And one of the reasons also why people are now completely possessed by the narrative, like completely possessed by political narratives, is because they've outsourced thinking. They just receive this information from the news or from Twitter or from wherever their bubble is, and now they feel like they are extremely powerful because have this coming to them. But that is it's a dangerous space, because you can see people can be completely manipulated in terms of their thinking.
Yeah, right. And it's almost happening at an increasing rate, it seems. Again, kind of aligning with the rate of technological proliferation or improvement. But I want to actually even go back further with this, because in some ways, you mentioned, a fire earlier. In some ways, fire is almost an original or either the original or an original technology, depending on how you look at it. And, and obviously Lucifer or Satan is always symbolized with fire, with hellfire, with, this light that challenges God almost is kind of the idea of Lucifer, if I'm not mistaken. And
because Lucifer actually just means the morning star.
Oh, really? Okay.
So it's an image of the idea that before the sun rises, there's a star that appears in the sky. It's Venus, and it's the morning star, and it's very bright. It's the brightest star in the sky. That's the joke. It's like it thinks that it's the brightest star in the sky, but it's only real if it reflects the sun. It claims that brightness for itself. It's an illusion, because when the sun comes up, Venus disappears. The morning star vanishes. So that's the whole imagery of the morning star, and Lucifer is about this secondary fire, you could say, something like that, like a subsidiary fire, which people grab and hold on to and raise up and think that this has value in itself. It only has value to the extent that it reflects something high, or else it becomes parasitic and becomes, and so that's the whole imagery of Lucifer. And image of stealing the fire from the gods, for example, you have that in the Promethean myth, where it's like we take the fire from the gods and now we want to use the fire of the gods to make ourselves independent from the gods. But it's like that fire only exists as a subsidiary of what is above. That's the imagery, let's say, of why we use that term to talk about the opponent. The Satan is Lucifer.
And what is above is obviously the sun. The sun, the moon, and the stars. And in recent years, so I grew up, and as most people did, with this sort of very scientific model, this very scientific view of our cosmos and our celestial bodies, which is that our sun is one of many hundreds of billions in the cosmos. Our moon is one of all these different things. Basically, that we are not special in any way, just some sort of cosmic fluke. But I mean, even in the most purely logical sense, through what we've observed, you can call it a fluke or call it random chance. That's just a matter of interpretation. But it is true that we are this unique sort of experiment, this very unique experience within this whole observable universe. But even more than that, I feel like maybe I can't quite put my finger on it, but I feel like there's something also about the human point of view as an observer, a unique observer in this creation of Earth, separate from other animals, that the sun and the moon and the stars being there in a way is for us. That is actually kind of why they're there. You know what I mean?
And people might think that's ridiculous, because they're like, no. But the thing is that you don't have any other perspective besides the human perspective. There is no other perspective. And so the scientist abstracts himself from the equation and pretends as if he is not the perspective. He's lying to himself, thinking it's like a weird blindness to the fact that all the categorizations that we have are human categorizations based on this point of view of consciousness, which looks out into the world and engages with phenomena. And so that is actually you could say it's like the crux of existence is in consciousness. Consciousness is this point of apprehension of being, right? And so the idea that we're just some fluke or whatever, blah, 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 but you're still saying that from the point of view of human consciousness and human experience. And so for example, like the idea that the sun is just one of the stars in the heavens, and it's just one, this burning thing of gas, in the sky. It's like, well, maybe you have a very marginal point, but in the end, the sun still makes the food you eat grow, and the sun still manages your day. And if it's light outside, that's when you're awake, and when it's dark outside, that's when you sleep. And so the sun is nonetheless arbiter of the patterns of your existence. So to say that it's just another star in the heavens is ridiculous. I mean, it is the sun. It is the one that decides how we calculate the year, how we calculate everything that makes us human. And because there is no other position besides this position to have, there is no other formulation of the cosmos which rivals that one. There's nothing wrong with talking about quasars and black holes and all these galaxies, and absolutely nothing wrong with that. We have to flip our hierarchy of perception back. Understand that, yes, but you still live in the world where down is the ground, up is the sky, fall, you hit your head. These things are what actually manages your life. Because if you fall on the ground and you crack your head open, you won't be able to talk about quasars and black holes anymore. Like, those will be gone for you. So there's a sense in which I think we have to be able to recapture this human perspective and understand that it is the only one that is available to us.
There seems to be sort of an archaic revival going on with this interest in orthodoxy, and I think even your popularity online with this seeing the world through these symbols, through these mythological symbols, religious symbols, because and it stands in contrast, like you said earlier, to this very like scientific approach or deductive approach, defined approach of like strict scriptures as this almost like rule book, rather than this fantastic story, which they are. TikTok, there's like this common memes and stuff. I mean, with younger people in general, like witchcraft and alchemy and these sort of like, different characters and roles people play. And you talk about chimeras, and maybe that's part of it, right? What do you see kind of unfolding, or what do you make of like these avatars, these virtual avatars, and these sometimes personas we adopt and portray? That I feel like people are returning to more interpretive views as a good.
No, you're right that's what's happening, and so you can understand it like. What we're noticing, what we're experiencing is a breakdown of the modern scientific materialism. It's like it's breaking down around us. And it's happening to a certain extent from within science. People are realizing that there is an aspect of even the material world which engages consciousness to a certain extent. Right? And so even if it is just the manner in which we categorize things that present themselves to us, like the fact that we have names for certain types of agglomerations of facts, means that these names and these identities that we recognize in the world happen through this consciousness. So that's definitely happening. At the same time, so what we're seeing is kind of like, as this cracks, you can understand the scientific materialism as a kind of solid bubble that was put around humans, where all this is ridiculous, God is ridiculous, angels are ridiculous, all these ideas, all these rituals are all ridiculous, all these things that we do, these prayers, it's all ridiculous, all of it's stupid. And then it's like, well, okay, then we move into that to a certain level until things start to fray and things start to crack, because we realize, oh, wait a minute, we don't have rituals. Why are we together? Why are we a country, or not just a bunch of people living on a piece of land? Like, why are we a family? And so you realize, wait a minute, no, these identities are not self-evident in scientific terms. Have to bind together with common means of attention, you could say. So this is happening. So it's like, this is something that's happening all over the place, but it's also happening in a kind of dark way, which is that if you think about the shape of any being, any identity, of a nation. A good way to describe it is, let's say, how the Greeks perceived themselves. This is usually how I describe it. So the Greeks had the umbilicus mundi. They had the navel of the world in Delphi. They actually had a place with a stone, this like magic stone that was the belly button of the world, and that's superstitious and it's crazy. Okay, well let's play it out. Let's say so. The Greeks had this, and they had something like a kind of ecumenical world where they recognize other people as sharing the same belly button of the world. They had the same language, they worshiped the same gods, they had the same rituals, they participated in the same mysteries. So they recognized each other as being one thing. Then as you moved out from that, you had strangers, people that aren't part of your group. At first, the strangers you encounter, they are somewhat like you, the Persians, right? They're a civilization. Maybe they know a bit of Greek, so we can exchange. But you keep going further and further out. The further you go out, the stranger things become, and the more idiosyncratic they become to your perception. So if you imagine, I don't know, a Greek guy 1,000 years ago countering an Australian bushman, they can't recognize that. There's nothing to recognize. Like they're so different from you that it's all idiosyncratic and broken down. That's represented in like ancient maps as monsters on the edge of the world. You have these beings on the edge of the world that are chimeras, that are mixtures of categories that don't fit. And when you meet something that doesn't fit in your category structure, the only way to deal with it is to say it's a mix of this and that. There's no other way to do it. Okay, you know, a Greek person sees a hippopotamus. They don't have a category for hippopotamus, so they say, well, it's like a horse, but it lives in a river, so it's a river horse. It's like it's a chimeric structure. It's a monstrous structure. So that is how we encounter the strange. Think about how the natives in South America, when they saw the Spaniards, like coming down from their boats, wearing armor, sitting on horses, like never seen iron, they'd never seen metal, they'd never seen horses. They looked at this being and they're like, this has 8 legs and it's shining, glowing in the sun, like it's a monster. What else could it be? So you could say it's superstitious, but that's an actual perception of reality. As we move further and further out into kind of breakdown of our identity, what we're seeing is chimera appear in front of us. People who desire, who wish to embody strange, who wish to embody the exceptional, the mixture, the places where things don't fit. Sorry, you said aliens?
Yeah, the people who embody the alien, the androgynous.
They embody the alien, and so it looks like furries. It looks like it looks like body transformation. It looks like people who are confused, have confused or mixed gender. It looks like all the things that we're seeing now. Basically, it's like we're on the edge of the world, right? But it has to do also with this increase in moving out from ourselves into technification and into let's say relying on the exterior in order to make us stand. So all of this works together. It's like you're moving away from your inside out into technical things, out into blah, blah, blah. And at some point you're like, wait a minute, I thought this was going to give us a rational, solid world, you know, that is utopian and this beautiful science fiction utopia. And what you find on the edge of that is sadomasochism and furries and like crazy things that have no sense, and cannibalism and people eating feces. And that's what you find on the edge of that, because it's like, that's where it breaks down. So I think so now people are like, wait a minute, like this isn't what we asked for, like what's going on? And some people are kind of going along with the ride, but at some point it's going to get a lot weirder, and it's already getting like really weird. Like when cannibalism starts to be like a subject that people talk about as if, oh, we need to break that taboo, like break the cannibalism taboo, really. Like, do you think, what are the next, like then it's going to be incest, then it's going to be bestiality, but it's already, bestiality is already there in the idea of this kind of furry avatar that is appearing. It's like this mixture of human and animal. So it's like, this is really the image that we see in this story before the fall, in the story of the Book of Enoch, right? The idea of the sons of God and the daughters of men, like these two things that don't go together, that join together, and that bring about end of a world, basically. So think about it. It's like it's all fraying on the edge. It's all it's in the fringe. It's all breaking apart. That really is what we are. But at the same time, it's an opportunity, because it is breaking down the solidity of the scientific materialism. So it's an opportunity to speak into that and to hopefully help people see the world is more than just matter. The world is more than just these scientific categories. And if you disregard that, you're going to end up, it's already happening, you're going to end up with like a gender fluid furry god. People are going to worship it.
Sonic the Hedgehog.
They're going to worship that. But it's already almost there. Like, we're almost there. It's right. It's right at our fingertips, we could say.
Yeah. Well, we can see it. We can see this aesthetic already, that we're talking about with, okay, like think about Grimes, for example. She's this leading figure of culture, of music, of artistry. And well, she looks more and more like an alien as time goes on. And I don't think that's just a coincidence. It says something about the dominant culture and where it's going. But,
see, like the cyborg is related to this, right? The idea of joining with the machine, joining with the animal, joining with kind of non-human creatures, whether it's angels or demons or whatever. Like, all of this aesthetic is going to become more and more pervasive as time goes on. Well, there's going to be reaction to it, and there's going to be backlash to it, but it's still going to keep getting weirder for a little while, at least.
Do you view this as is this something beyond culture, outside of culture, or is this a cultural byproduct of technology?
It's a playing out of a narrative. It's a playing out of a certain perspective, and
okay.
it is this Luciferian perspective. You can see it that way. It's a playing out of thinking that we can grab things and contain them completely for ourselves. Like, we can take this fire and we can make it ours. At first it works and we think that we've got it. And then because it's disconnected with the transcendent principles, then it starts to get weird and starts to fray and it starts to break apart. It starts to get mixed and confused. And then what we do is we compensate with authoritarian measures, because those two things go together. And that's also one of the things it's important to always remember. It's like, it's not just the crazy, like furry god. It's also the hyper insane levels of tracking and control that are being instituted at the same time. It's like the vision, the final version of that is like, you being whatever the hell you want in the metaverse also means giving everything about yourself up to whoever is managing that.
There's there's something to be said about that. So that perspective, I tend to think that the common, so what you just talked about is sort of these authoritarian measures combined with this like very obsessed and a hubris, this hubris of humans to think that by containing this fire, we can be God. I mean, that in very simple terms, that's kind of what's happening, that we don't need God, that we can be these higher beings without a belief in something beyond ourselves. And well, I think in a psychological term, that's like the ego is inflated, is unchecked, because the ego assumes that we as flesh and blood humans can understand the totality of the universe, can traverse space, can go light years away, when perhaps this is not our purpose as flesh and blood humans, but maybe our purpose is here in this realm to observe these things through our perception that are already in this natural world. But in that, I find the promise of things like psilocybin mushrooms to be very interesting, because what they do is that, well, first of all, they are part of this natural creation as well. But what they do is that they strip back these layers of the self, these layers of conditioning, and they make you kind of come to your core with, a proper sort of respectful ceremony. I mean, these are done throughout the Amazon, throughout Mesoamerica, throughout cultures around the world, Southeast Asia. This sort of stripping back the layers of the self to be one with everything again, to experience that through the direct experience. Because while all these stories can give you the concept of there being a one universal consciousness, of there being a God, of there being a purpose, of there being a joined unity to all of this, I think the experience of it is the most convincing thing there is. What role do you see, if any, with certain psychedelics or certain substances as an original technology, as a technology that arguably I could say can bring you closer to the natural, to the God, to the internal rather than the external. What does you think the role is of those things?
I think, to be totally frankly honest with you, I think that the psychedelics are part of the reason why we're here. Like, they're actually part of the problem right now. So psychedelics got introduced into the West in the 1960s in a big way. Like, they were probably around before, but they became prominently used in the 1960s. And you could understand it like, think about it the way that I explained it, which is that scientific materialism is something like a solid thing. It's like, it has a solidity to it. It has an illusion of totality. It's not totality, but it kind of presents that idea that, no, we got it. We mastered this. We got it. So if you rip the veil off, then sometimes what you see, or what will come in, will be the monsters. Monsters are also what are going to come in, because they're on the edge of that too. Like, they're on the other side of the solidity. So I think that at least in the 1960s, with Timothy Leary, you can see that it led to part of the breakdown was part of what Leary did. Like, not just him, but let's say he was definitely part of why we are here. So I think that I think that the idea that people now are reintroducing this and think that it's going to solve our problem, it's like, technology is not going to solve your problem, and these supplements are not going to solve your problem. Ripping the veil off can make it much worse in terms of society, because people don't have the capacity to judge what it is they're encountering, so they can confuse the God with the monster. They can confuse the amorphous with the source of things, and that's what I'm seeing. Honestly, that's what I'm seeing. I'm worried about. Let's say, so if you look at the way that psychedelics were used in traditional culture, it's like, it wasn't something that was just available to everybody, that people could just sit on the couch and pop something watching Netflix. Like, like, if you people that talk, for example, about the Eleusinian mysteries, and they come to the conclusion that the Eleusinian mysteries were about psychedelics, that's bullshit. The Eleusinian mysteries were not about psychedelics. They were like a 3-day ritual, fully immersed ritual, where you would be taken through several steps that would last all this time. And then, if at the end of that ritual, people were given some substance in order to kind of tip them over, maybe. The idea that that's what the Eleusinian mysteries are is total nonsense. And it's the total nonsense that a scientific materialist would, it's like, well, we know what spirituality is. It's this pill. This is what spirituality is. This pill is this mushroom. We found it. It's a substance in the world. It's a chemical formula. I can write out the chemical formula for you. And to be honest, I'm extremely worried about that. And some of my own friends are on the other side of that. And I totally understand it. And we have constant discussions about it. So I'm not discounting completely what that could be, or what that experience is. But I'm definitely worried about the fact that everybody's talking about it. And I'm definitely worried about the fact that people in Silicon Valley are microdosing, and that this microdosing is probably one of the things that's feeding AI right now. Is all these tech giants that are using psychedelics to create this thing that's coming towards us.
Okay, you said a lot of interesting things there that I think need to be understood by a lot of people who talk about these things at all. But I do want to kind of offer maybe a little pushback, not pushback, but I want to kind of add to that, which is so you mentioned the ritual, and I think you're absolutely right that it's not about this substance. It's not about the psychedelic at all. Actually, the term psychedelic was just made up, I think, in the 60s anyways, but it's not about the substance or the material. It's more about, it's like the Bible could be viewed as, oh, it's just this book about a guy named Jesus. But actually, no, it's not about a guy named Jesus, the flesh and blood man who walked this earth. It's about that and what he represented and what he changed in the world, what were the effects of that? What was the experience of that? All these different layers to it. And I don't think that anything in a, whether it's a pill or a plant or whatever, is the solution itself. And I don't think if everybody just took shrooms or something, like we're going to suddenly find God. But I do think that there is a need within society for the shaman role and for these substances in a certain capacity, with rituals, with traditions, to be a sort of bridge between the spiritual and the material, a vision of the immaterial, a vision of the spiritual that's not confined to a screen. Because all the time through our screens, through our media, we are being fed a psychedelic experience. You're right. Our world is made up of these things. But the thing is, those psychedelic experiences they're given to us, they're fed to us, they're manufactured for us, versus the one that you can have yourself is a direct experience. It's a primacy. I would say it's even an experience with God, or with other, like you said, forces on the boundary, maybe even the devil in some ways. But the point is that not everyone everyone may not be equipped for it, but the symbolism that you can see under these, in the right context, I think can inform you to a place that just the scriptures or just the abstract concepts won't, because the primacy of direct experience is the most real thing there is. If that's not real, nothing is real.
I agree with the idea of experience and direct experience, but I think that it seems to me, at least the way that it's presented right now, just like any kind of technology, that psychedelics is presented to people like a shortcut. Like, take this and you'll have this experience and then you'll know what it's about. But I think that's all. It's already the problem. Like, it's already the problem of what it is that we're talking about. Like, the idea that the tool is and I maybe you're saying that that's not what you're supporting, but even people like going to South America and doing ayahuasca, they're going to a strange land. They're participating in rituals that they don't understand, rituals that have nothing to do with them, that is not the source of their culture, that is not the source of their story. And then they're plunging into this weird, strange world. And then they're taking this substance, which is meant to be integrated, like even in terms of the shamanistic cultures, like it's meant to be integrated within the shamanistic culture in a world that has all the names of all these things that they're dealing with. And then they go there and they do that. And it's like, that's a very, very strange and dangerous practice, because like you're doing it in the context of an alienating culture. So think about the Eleusinian mysteries again. So the Eleusinian mysteries were the core of Hellenistic culture. They were that which bound Hellenistic culture together. People would go, they would be initiated into the mysteries. They would never talk about it ever, to a point where we don't know what they did there. Thousands and thousands of people were initiated into the mysteries, and we have no account of it. That's how powerful and how much it was seen as a true secret anchor to their culture. It's like what we're seeing now with going to some lab and like hiring some company to like go somewhere now and marketing psychedelics is like, man, it's a whole other thing. And so you can.
But can't you say the same thing about the Bible? Like, in the sense that, well, there's this commodified version.
I agree that it's not good. The commodified version of the Bible is definitely not good, but at least it's connected to your story. Like, at least it's connected to who we are Christians. Like, we've been Christians for thousands of years, and this is the thing that we're bathing in. And so there is a distorted version of that, and there is a commodified and twisted and kind of superficial version of that. I totally agree.
But who's to say that part of who we are is not this direct conscious experience, this breakdown of barriers, this dissolving of boundaries, this resetting of conditioning, and really this reactivation of the language centers of your brain, which is what certain substances do. And I don't think all substances are created equal, but I view it like a book. Like not all books are created equal, and certain books can transport you to a different state of mind, a different perspective. Well, if these are going to be if they've been with us for so many thousands of years, possibly through evolution, and I don't know, actually, I wanted to ask you about that too, evolution, because I feel like there's soft evolution and hard evolution. And at the end of the day, it's just this theory by Darwin, but it's sort of this, it was born, as I understand it, evolution was born out of this period of time in which science was totally obsessed with essentially ending the idea of there being a God. Science was obsessed with finding something like evolution as a theory, and it found it. And it's not necessarily applicable to all things, but that's just, I'll ask you about that in a moment. But what the reason I brought that up is because these certain long as civilization has been around, even in the Bible, there's some speculation that the acacia tree was the burning bush that Moses saw. And you talk about how these things were secrets, and people did not just openly discuss them and share them. I feel like it's very possible that many stories of the Bible were partially informed or related to different kind of psychedelic, quote unquote, experiences, but not in such explicit ways. Have you? What do you think?
I know these theories. I'm not a big fan of the theory because, well, it's also because the same, like it's like that Jesus mushroom book, whatever it's called, like one of the things that I've noticed, and this is something that happens with people that take substances in general, is that their whole horizon gets taken up by the substance. And I feel like that's something that I see in this type of interpretation, which is like there's a internal reason why the bush is a thorn bush in scripture, and it has to do with a logic of storytelling. It has to do with the fall and the thorns in the fall, and how these thorns are now alight with fire and are manifesting God to Moses. And so there's an internal logic to it. And the idea is that, is it possible that substances were at some point involved in some of these things somewhere, somehow? I'm not denying that that's a possibility, but I feel like the focus on that is mistaken. So like a good example would be to think about a monk right now, like a monk at the Mount Athos. Like a monk at Mount Athos lives his entire life in prayer, fasts and prays and has vigils, will stay up all night, weeks at a time. It will have certain practices which are integrated to his moral life, is that he's also trying to become a better person. And so that person, through all those practices, you could chemically explain why at some point those monks are going to have visions. Those visions are framed in an entire set of practices. They're not just given to them on a biscuit or whatever. Like they're not just given to them like that, because the monks and the tradition understand that spiritual experiences are not just positive. Like idea of ripping the veil away and entering into a world of principalities is not something that is, like I said, is not something that is just good. It can also drive you crazy. It can make you insane. And you have examples of monks that go insane. So you have examples of monks that go insane, but I think there are a lot more examples of people who have given themselves over to psychedelics who lose it. I've known people to whom that has happened. I know some people that have, like before COVID, they went to South America and then did the thing, and when they described it, it was also kind of embarrassing because it's not done by native local people. It's like people from California who go down there and like set up these things, and they do a version of the ritual. And anyway, so the guy does it and then comes back, and it's like, okay, But then when COVID hit, he lost his mind. He became crazy. Like, and the last time I talked to him, like it was really scary. Like I think he had been violent to someone in his family, and was like living in his car, and it was like, and in his eyes, like I could see his eyes were shaking like someone who has completely lost it. And I think there are several examples of that where it's like, I don't know, man. I'm not saying, like I said, I'm not even saying that there's absolutely no value in this. I think that the fact that it's becoming so pervasive in culture, and that, someone who takes psychedelics could be led to think Burning Man is the equivalent of Christianity, let's say. That all these silly, fake religious practices that are appearing all over the place, that there's no hierarchy between them, no hierarchy in this. Like there's a way in which, when the shaman would take the substance, like he probably did it after days of fasting, after days of sexual abstinence, after days of self-mortification, and it was like a long process, and and then would come back with something that would connect to the community and would fill the community with more. To be honest, like I don't see that happening at all right now.
You see some level of hierarchy to be necessary for the truth.
Of course, that's inevitable. But the truth manifested. So you could say that there's a way. This is also one of the problems I think psychedelics takes people into, and it's the problem of the California Buddhists, which is that it's all about non-duality. It's like, man, I'm going to have a non-dual experience. And then they have these non-dual experiences. They don't understand that non-duality is the source of duality. Non-duality is the source of structure. So if you just take non-duality for itself, it can also swallow the world, devour particularity. So that's why often you'll have people who have these kind of these psychedelic experiences who come back and be like, well, all religions are the same. It's all the same. It's all, and it's like, okay, dude, you're destroying the world when you say that. Because there is a reality to non-duality. There is a reality into which non-duality transcends the world of manifestation and of hierarchy and of rules and of roles and all of this stuff. You're right. Beyond that is something which is non-dual. If it doesn't feed the world of existence, if it doesn't increase existence, and then it's actually it's like a vortex. It will suck up the world into it.
I would just offer maybe a bit of a personal note on this, which is that I'm not some sort of crazy psychonaut, nor would I ever. I think you have to be very respectful, very cognizant, and aware of your surroundings, and integrate these things into a lifestyle, into a way that actually, like you said, is not just this. Well, the more externalized, the more processed the experience is, the further detached from reality it is. This is why I'm very cautious about LSD, for example, because LSD is a synthesized lab-made chemical. And by doing so, I think the process that was put into making it is also reflected in the sort of process that one goes through when taking it. And it's sort of, it's part of the culture, and these things go hand in hand. But what I've found from my experiences, which are pretty minor compared to most of these like heavy dosage type things, I've found that it's brought me closer to my faith in God by dissolving my sense of self, at least temporarily, and allowing me to see that who I am is a collection of experiences and memories, and what really matters are the people that I love, the things that I love, not the things so much, but the people that I love, that are going, and then the things that matter are the things that will create the greatest good across time. But the most interesting angle has just been an increasing awareness of certain symbols. And I had this realization once, to bring it back to the sun, and I have a question for you at the end of this, which is that I realized every day is this cycle of life, of the sun coming up and going down. And it's almost like when the sun is up, when it's a bright day outside, everything is defined, everything is lit up for you, everything is seen, you're safe. It's like akin to like a kid in childhood. You have no care in the world, you're playing around. And at night, as the sun goes down, as the sun is setting, it's almost as if and you're coming into adulthood, adolescence. And now there's this sort of bittersweet sunset of that light of God, of your father, your own father, or the light of God, or whatever it may be, is leaving this world for now, is leaving my world for now. And now it's dark. And when it is dark, it's time to stand up and be a man and survive until the next day, until God's light is back. Of course, in our world, in our conveniences, in our technologically driven world, we're so disconnected from this cycle. It's like, okay, well, it's just dark out or it's light out, but it doesn't matter because we have light inside, because we have food in the fridge, all these different things. But you can imagine somebody 5,000 years ago had to pay very close attention, not just to the sun, but to the celestial bodies and the way they move throughout the cosmos. And you have all these ancient sites that map this out. Part of them you could see in Eastern Turkey, which was formerly Armenia. There's a place called Göbekli Tepe, which is like famous now. The pyramids, the temples of Mesoamerica and different places are mapping out this orientation of the stars. And I wonder, and again, this comes back to the TikTok witches, which is that astrology is so prevalent, is so popular, is so fun because it's interpretive. It's an interpretive view of the world. It's, you're an Aries, that means this or that. And, it's sort of like bringing fun back into worldviews rather than just talking about, did you hear about the latest scientific study from some star 5 billion years ago? But I guess what I'm asking is, how do you see that astrology being integrated into orthodoxy or into the future? I mean, do you see any place for that?
I mean, of course, like astrology, a certain type of astrology has always been part of any traditional culture. It's part of ancient cultures, and it's also part of Christianity. That is, there was a sense in which people understood the movement of the stars as being a pattern of being that was revealing itself to them. So the cycles of precession and also the hierarchy of precessions. And so people would notice that there's an actual hierarchy of lights that move through the sky, right? So the planets, that's the way you experience them. We don't think of it that way because we don't see it. We don't see the stars going through the sky and seeing how there are arcs of hierarchy up to Saturn, like, from the moon up to Saturn. And so these are revealing to us the manner in which the world exists, definitely. And the same way, the constellations are very, very ancient. Like the constellations are a lot of them are very universal and very ancient, and they seem to be this recognizing of story patterns and of structural patterns in the heavens. Now, I think that honestly, a lot of that knowledge, I think, has been lost. I think a lot of that knowledge is not available to us right now. It's been lost for a bunch of reasons. But if you look at the kings or the Byzantine emperor, they would always have their star charts done. Like this was a normal thing to do because they had to find their place in the cosmic story. Like, where is my place? Like, how do I fit in this bigger story? That is the way that they would understand it. But the problem, I think, now with astrology is that it's become just this kind of vulgar prediction, like a kind of vulgar prediction of like, well, if you're born in this ascendancy or whatever, or under this sign or whatever, then it means this for you. And to be honest, I don't think there's that much credibility to the way that it's happening now. But I do agree with you that the desire for it, people's desire to be able to fit themselves in this giant, bigger pattern, is a sign that people want more than just the material world. And it also Also, sadly, I think it's also because I'd say that one of the things that happened is that Christianity lost its mysticism a while ago, a lot of it. Not as much in Armenia, by the way, and not as much in the East. But I would say in the West, it's lost a lot of its mysticism. And so it left the common people on their own. And so the version of astrology you get right now is something like, what a peasant villager would have, way that they would have dealt with it. And so I think the desire to see yourself in a bigger pattern is a good sign. But I think obviously a lot of the things people are saying is just kind of made up. Like it's just because let's say there is a giant pattern and we can get some revelations from it, doesn't mean that the one person on TikTok telling you what's going to happen knows what the hell they're talking about. It's probably not. Probably they don't.
I wonder if this is just a leap, but I wonder if symbols can be used. You talked about how at the end of all the scientific abstractions, it comes down to your perception. It comes down to the ground beneath your feet and the sky above you. And I wonder if in this world of abstract concepts and thinking and mythology, symbols can be a grounding tool themselves so that whether you're completely insane or onto something. And, the cross obviously is one of these symbols. But also the spiral. And I at the start of this, I mentioned how one of the most ancient Armenian symbols is this outward, like floral pattern spiral. And you see this all throughout the East, all throughout different cultures. And even the Milky Way galaxy is an observable spiral, and all living things actually have this sort of tendency to have this shape of the spiral turning point, or turning around one point. And so I guess what the significance I see of symbols is that I wonder, and what it seems like is that through all of this craziness, through all of this wildness, the darkness, through the chaos of this interpretive world we're sort of returning to, through this immaterial world of the virtual, maybe the symbols can be, and with memes, you see this with Pepe, right, as you've talked about. You see this. What's that?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. So I guess that's that's why I feel like you're an interesting voice in all this, because if people can see the symbols, they can, I think, navigate themselves a little bit through this, or not themselves, but they can be, their ancestors maybe can be navigating them, because these symbols are always ancient, actually. And they've always been there, and they're always here in the small picture and in the big picture.
So, I think that your intuition about symbolism is right, that I think that we're in a point now where some people can see the analogies and can kind of understand what it is that these symbols mean, let's say. So the image that you talk about, the spiral with the center, that is a very, very ancient symbolism. It's really is a version of a swastika, which is one of the oldest symbols humans have, which is a center and something which is a cross is part of that symbolism. The wheel in general, this idea of a center, and then things that emanate from that center. The idea that the fruits or the flowers emanate from that center. All of this makes sense in terms of understanding what a center and its multiplicity is, like how multiplicity and unity function together in one. So these symbols can be very helpful if we can point people to a meaning instead of thinking, like, oh wait, is this a spaceship? Like, is this an alien space? You know how people have these insane intuitions about some of the symbolism, trying to reduce them to material causes and to material things. But if we can help people see how they are actually structures, like let's say they're structures of reality, structures of perception that are reduced to almost sometimes geometric shapes. So I think that can be extremely powerful.
And well, in that same vein, that can be a guide through sort of transcendental hallucinogenic experiences, I believe, as well, where, if you're seeing everything as just an extraterrestrial alien or something, or as like a, like you said, some sort of maybe icon through culture or media, I think you're kind of looking at it backwards. But if you're seeing what is already there, these fractal designs, these patterns that are already there, whether you're tripping or not, well, then I do think that can illuminate you or open your eyes to see these things as significant, because they are. So I think it's possible for people to spiral upwards or spiral downwards the closer they get to this sort of interpretive view, the more they integrate that into their lives, whether it's through substances or through TikTok. It's all kind of the same. I mean, the brain is perceiving information, and so whether it's through a phone screen or through a substance, it's all kind of happening in a different medium, but it's the same.
The thing. Well, let me just say one thing in terms of the same. Like, I think that. So one of the things when we talk about the Eleusinian mysteries, it's a very good example, which is that the Eleusinian mysteries were communal. That is, they were liturgical in the way that we understand even a Christian ceremony today. That is, there were people coming together, doing things together at the same time, focusing their attention on the same thing, and then participating in a transformational action towards something transcendent. Okay, that is very different from both TikTok and just taking a hallucinogen, which is that these levels have to stack. So that's why they look the way they do. That is, that your personal intuition and transformation, for it not to be crazy and idiosyncratic and take you to strange places, has to be connected towards something like a communal participation, communal understanding, communal existence. And then that communal existence can be, let's say, you think of for example, the idea that churches, like, so you have churches where people go and they come together and they worship together, they process together, they participate in the body of the God, they participate in the body of Christ. Then they also know that this is happening everywhere else in the world. And so there is this interconnectivity, which is bringing people into one. Isn't and has there's a less of a danger. It's not, there are people that can, even in Christian religious practice, can become crazy, but there's less of a danger of that happening than if you're like a 12-year-old girl looking at TikTok videos in your room. It's a little bit of a different that it has a different tack, let's say.
That all sounds completely in line. Like, I totally agree with all that. But maybe in a very basic way, another way I could describe it is like, just in very basic, which is, the more you're doing something isolated and the more stimulating it is, the more information it is, whether it's psychedelics or the internet, you're going to become crazier and crazier, essentially, if you don't have a touchstone of somebody to interact with, to share this experience with, to understand it with, to interpret it with. If you don't have if you don't have community, I think it's very dangerous to be messing with certain things unguided and on your own, because you're going to drift further into some abstract world of your own making, perhaps. Unless you're extremely disciplined monk who's like something, I don't know, maybe there's exceptions.
Well, there is for sure, like, there is the hermit exists, but usually, right, like, the hermits are always, say, even in monastic practice, there's always like warning after warning after warning to not be a hermit. Like, don't be a hermit, don't be a hermit, don't be a hermit. Then nonetheless, we admire and we kind of venerate those that succeed in doing that. So it's like this play. But I guess I have a question for you. So you said you're Armenian. I mean, do you go to church? Like, are you a practicing Armenian Christian in that sense?
So I believe in Jesus. I believe in the significance of Christianity, and I believe it to be the most cohesive for a man's life, certainly, because I believe that the story of Jesus is like the ultimate guide for how men should be, perhaps, at least, and men are significant in our story of humanity. But with Armenia, it's weird because I was born in Glendale, Los Angeles, which has a large Armenian community. They speak it. It was my first language. Armenian was my first language. But shortly after that, when I was a year old, so for almost my whole life, lived in Vegas. And Vegas is this cultural desert. It's a literal desert, but it's also a cultural desert. It's just people moving here from across the country, around the world, because it's cheap, it's affordable, it's whatever. There's no real it's like the den of sin. I mean, it's built on the industry of sin, basically, right? So I feel grew up in Las Vegas. Yeah, it's the suburbs of Vegas, man. I feel like I get when people talk about just a lot of these dark things, because I felt very isolated from people for a lot of my life. Not that I don't have friends or didn't hang out, but it's just I missed the cultural community of being Armenian, of being Christian. Luckily, I went to a good Christian school, like that was not oppressive. So in some ways, I think that was a good experience. But yeah, it's very weird. I've gone to the country many times. My dad is there right now. He loves it. He's super pro Armenia. And I want to preserve, it's important to me to preserve the history, the traditions, the language. But the most important connection I have at this point in my life is that I understand where I come from as a long line of ancestors who have had these traditions, who died for their belief, for Christ. I mean, in the Ottoman Empire, you had the Armenian genocide and all these other conflicts throughout history, because Armenians were sort of, they were sort of this always outcast group. I mean, they started from Haik, the patron, or not the patron saint, the patriarch of Armenia, started from Babylon. The story is that there was Babylon and the region by Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark is said to have landed, now in modern day Turkey. But this is the Armenian symbol. This is all of our, along with the cross and other things, but this is one of our cultural symbols. And so Haik led his people to the mountains of Mount Ararat, away from Babylon and away from this king at the time. I forgot the name of him, but it was almost like a David and Goliath story, where he slayed the king, who incidentally at these times in these stories, these kings were described as being these giants as well. These giants of Goliath, of Hammurabi, I believe, from Sumeria, they were described as being like 9-10 feet tall. So it's the story of my ancestors is I feel like is directly or indirectly guiding me now, where I feel like we're having this archaic revival, and this orthodoxy revival. And like you said, Armenia has kind of held on to their mysticism to some degree throughout these centuries, like in Armenian church, which I have been to many times, but I don't go regularly. Sorry, this is a very long-winded answer, but they have this, because there's a lot of interesting things. They have this incense burning that happens where it's like a little lantern almost on a chain, and they go like this. There's a lot of chanting, long reading of passages of the Bible that is like sung. They sing the passages, and it takes forever. But, that's kind of their style. Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
listen, man, I need to go. I need down until 3:30, and I have some pressing things that are pressing on.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Hey. Yeah, this was really interesting. There was actually even more things I would like to talk about, maybe as another time we could, because you're like always on the pulse of what is the relevant to what my interests are. So thank you for doing the work that you do.
It's my pleasure. Where are you going to post this? Where are you going to post this video, do you think?
I have a couple YouTube channels, and I have one where I kind of post long form stuff. So I think I'll post it there, or maybe I'll split it up into some clips and try that out. But I have a main channel, but on the main channel I just post. Yeah. Okay. And I don't think it's going to be on my main channel, but no worries. Maybe
send me a link, and then we'll see also kind of discussions around it, and we can maybe organize another discussion.
Yeah. Sounds good, man. I appreciate your time.
It's good to meet you.
Have a great day. God bless. Nice to meet you as well. Bye.